Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a rather impromptu Law of Self-Defense live stream. Thanks, guys, for joining me here today. We are simul streaming on YouTube, working on our Law of Self-Defense, which is, if I can get that going, working, and finally on the Law of Self-Defense account on X, which is also working. Awesome. And we are here to talk about national concealed carry reciprocity. Now, this is a topic that I've covered before, uh, often in a somewhat negative way. Now, to put that in context, I consider myself a Second Amendment absolutist. As far as I'm concerned, every gun control law preemptively applied to law abiding, mentally sound American citizens is facially unconstitutional. All of them. All of them. Background checks, concealed carry permits, prohibitions on full auto, everything. And the Supreme Court tells us that unless a modern infringement of the Second Amendment would have passed muster with the founders, it's unconstitutional today. And there were some restrictions on keeping and bearing arms at the founding. For example, there were states that had prohibitions on carrying a gun at a polling place on election day. But these were very narrowly focused restrictions, both in time, place, and manner. Today's gun control laws, of course, apply all the time in all the places to all the things, and they're all facially unconstitutional. As you all know, I'm sure if you've watched any of my content, I'm a guy who carries a gun for personal protection. I carry a gun every day. I've carried a gun every day for personal protection for more than 30 years. So I believe in concealed carry for people who want to do it. It's your choice. It's not for everybody, but the choice should be yours. It shouldn't be up to the government to decide whether you're an appropriate person to carry a concealed firearm for lawful purposes, for personal protection on your person as you go about your day. That said, I don't think that really national concealed carry reciprocity is the best way to go. I think it has defects. I've talked about those before. I think in late November, I did a show talking about President-elect Trump advocating for concealed carry reciprocity. If I recall correctly, he would sign that bill on day one of his administration. Um, and it's not that I think it's a bad thing to do. I think it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's the best solution. The best solution is to not allow any government entity to require any kind of concealed carry permit. None. There were no concealed carry permits at the founding. It's ridiculous. These things are all facially unconstitutional. So I simply don't think that concealed carry permits should be permitted to exist. If you're a law-abiding, mentally sound American citizen, and by the way, of course, the majority of states recognize this now because they're constitutional carry. But if you're a law-abiding American citizen, not legally prohibited from having a gun, then you can simply carry a gun on your person for lawful purposes with no need of a license, no need of a permission slip, no need of hundreds of dollars, maybe more, in required mandatory training. We've all taken these training. We know how pathetic it is. And licensing fees and background checks and having to go here and there and get photographed and fingerprint nonsense. Did the bad guys do any of that? Of course not. So I think the real answer is no permits. Now, that said, we have permits. They exist. I carry one in my wallets. I have permits from various states to maximize the number of jurisdictions in which I can lawfully carry a concealed weapon under the current scheme prevalent in America that infringes our Second Amendment. Now, I do feel obliged to say, when I started carrying a gun concealed lawfully, I was living in Massachusetts. It was the 1990s, the early 1990s. There were very few states that had any provision for any kind of concealed carry by a private citizen. None. Massachusetts did, shockingly enough. No one was more surprised than me when I moved to Massachusetts after law school and discovered I could get a concealed carry permit. I was shocked. Of course, I came from Metro New York City, where getting a concealed carry permit, even if it was technically possible, was practically impossible. They just weren't given out. And sure enough, I got my concealed carry permit in Massachusetts, and, I've been carrying ever since in all the states in which I've lived and many other states in which I was legally permitted through non-resident permits or reciprocity or whatever the case may be. But in those days, there was, I think, 5 or 6 states that had any kind of provision for concealed carry. You may be shocked to learn some of the states that didn't. Texas, for example, had no provision for concealed carry by private citizens. None. You could have a gun in your car, and that was it. You could not legally carry it on your person. So, since then, now every state has some provision for licensed concealed carry of firearms, even states like New York and New Jersey. Now, again, it may be like the situation in New York when I lived there, where it was technically possible, but practically impossible. But it's on the books, and the majority of states now don't even require a license because they're constitutional carry, as I already mentioned. So things have certainly gotten a lot better in the last 30 plus years that I've been carrying a gun. But of course, there still are a lot of states, 6, 8, 10 states maybe, where they do everything they can to make it all but impossible for normal law-abiding, mentally sound American citizens to get the required permission slip from the state to carry a concealed gun on their person. And of course, many of us live in states where we are allowed to carry concealed, and then when we travel to these fascist anti-Second Amendment states, we have to leave our guns at home and go about our day unarmed. This is certainly true for me when I visit family in New York, when I visit family in New Jersey, when I visit family in California, when I visit friends in Illinois. I'm allowed to carry a gun every day on my person in roughly 38 states, but when I go to one of those states, I can't carry. Suddenly, it would be a crime. So I have to leave my gun at home. So these national reciprocity bills that have recently been introduced in the US Senate and the House, their goal is to make it so that if you have a concealed carry permit from wherever, that permit's good everywhere. And if you come from a state that has constitutional carry, that constitutional carry travels with you. And you're also not required to have a permit in whatever state you're visiting across the entire United States. Okay, I don't know. Am I peaking? Let me move my slider down a little bit on the audio. Shane is telling me my audio is breaking up a bit. I didn't think I would need earbuds, but let me try. So what I'd like to do today is step through both the Senate and the House bill, the national reciprocity bills. They're quite short. They're not very long. I'm not going to read them word for word. I don't think. I'll just kind of summarize the import of the chapters. They are not the same. They're very similar, but they're not the same. And importantly, the House bill includes a vital provision that the Senate bill does not. And that vital provision is what would give national concealed carry reciprocity teeth, real teeth. Because one of the problems we have with these laws that purport to be helpful to gun owners is that they don't have any teeth. In other words, the gun control states remain free to basically ignore the law, and you have no counter to their simple ignoring um, the law. Now, a good example of this is the FOPA federal statute, FOPA, Firearms Owners Protection Act, I believe it stands for. And a key provision of that deals with the ability to transport guns across states that are hostile to gun ownership. So imagine you're traveling from state A to state C. And in both those states, you're legally permitted to be in possession of the firearm in question. But in transporting it from state A to state C, you have to cross state B. Say you're going from Maine to Florida. you're going to cross a bunch of states. You have to cross New York for sure to get from Maine to Florida by car, right? If you're not traveling by air. And a gun you can own in Maine and you can own in Florida can be completely illegal in the state of New York. And so the federal government, when it passed the FOPA Act, it was saying, listen, if the gun's legal where you started and it's legal where you ended your journey, we're not going to allow you to be put in prison because it happens to be unlawful in the state you're passing through. You're merely passing through if you meet these criteria. And essentially the criteria is the gun has to be unloaded, it has to be in a locked box, it has to be separate from the ammunition, and it has to be inaccessible to the people inside the vehicle. If you meet those conditions, the federal government says it's not a crime, either a federal crime or a state crime, for you to be in possession of that gun in New York. Well, what states like New York and New Jersey do as a practical matter is if they do a traffic stop, they discover you have the gun in the car, and you've met all the conditions of FOPA, they're likely to arrest you anyway for unlawful possession of the firearm, because what they say is, well, I'm just a local cop. I'm just a state trooper. I don't know all this federal law stuff. I'm just going to arrest you and charge you, and the prosecutor will take you to trial. And you can raise FOPA as a affirmative defense at trial. And when you do that, and if in fact you were in compliance with FOPA, the state charge against you for unlawful possession of a gun will be dismissed after tens of thousands of dollars in legal expenses and legal peril. So they play that game, and there's no way for you to sanction them for playing that game. They'll just say, hey, we were acting within our legal authority as a state trooper, as a state prosecutor in New Jersey. Too bad, tough luck. So we need teeth. The mere having of the statute that says it's allowed doesn't mean anything if the anti-Second Amendment state can turn the process itself into a punishment. That makes the statutory privilege pointless, because you can't exercise it at the risk of getting arrested and put in a cage, having to make bail, spending tens of thousands of dollars in legal, having to travel back to that state for trial to make that affirmative defense. So, yeah, also I see in the comments, good luck getting your gun back. Oh, they're supposed to give it back. It is your property. In Massachusetts, we used to see a lot of cases where seized guns would be thrown basically in the cellars of these 100-year-old police stations in these small towns in Massachusetts, and kept for a couple of years. And eventually you got it back, and it was a rusted, solid hunk of metal. It was worthless. They'd effectively destroyed it. But here's your rusted piece of metal back, sir. Sorry for the delay and the inconvenience. So what you need, what I've always advocated, is the government's free to create what's called a cause of action. A cause of action is legal permission to sue somebody if they do a particular thing wrong. Now, generally, you don't need, the causes of action are just established in traditional civil law. We all have legal duties to each other. We have legal duties not to cause unnecessary harm to each other, for example. And if you do cause that harm, you can be civilly sued in court. But sometimes it's not clear whether or not you have a right to sue in court. And if it's not clear, the government is free to create a cause of action where they say, you have the right to sue this person if they do this to you. And the House version of this concealed carry reciprocity bill has that. And that's the teeth. That's what enables you, for the first time I've seen in any of these proposals, to actually hold accountable people who see the law, see your legal privilege, laugh at you, arrest you, charge you, prosecute you, and make you spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal expenses as an affirmative defense at trial. So I'm going to do the Senate bill first, because I want to do both. Now, the Senate bill is the weaker of the two because it does not include the teeth. But otherwise, it's mostly the same as the House bill. So let's go ahead and let's see, pull this up. Now, the Senate bill, at least the version I have, does not have a bill number yet. I'm not sure why. So it's Senate bill blank. But let's go ahead and take a look. So this is to be called the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2025. And it holds, in general, notwithstanding any provision of the law of any state or political subdivision, so that would be like New York State or New York City, an individual who's not prohibited by federal law from possessing a gun, so you're not a convicted felon, for example, and who's carrying government issued photographic identification, like a driver's license, and is carrying a valid license or permit issued by a state that permits individual concealed carry. So you have a driver's license and you have a concealed carry permit. That person may possess and carry a concealed weapon other than a machine gun. I don't know why they hate machine guns so much, other than a machine gun or destructive device that has been shipped or transported in interstate commerce. That sentence is there just so they have federal jurisdiction over this. In any state, you can carry that gun in any state other than the state of residence. It should be in addition to the state of residence of the individual. If the state in which you're carrying allows residence of itself, it allows its own residents to obtain licenses and permits to carry concealed. So that means that's every state, because every state has some technical provision for concealed carry by private citizens. They may make it difficult and costly, but it exists. It's on the book. So that state, if you go through New York has a provision for concealed carry. If you go through New York and you have your driver's license from another state and your concealed carry permit from another state, you can carry in New York because New York has a statute that allows for concealed carry. Or in the second paragraph here, if you come from a state that does not prohibit the carrying of concealed firearms by residents, that's the constitutional carry state provision. So the majority of states now are constitutional carry. You can carry in those states without the need for any state permission. You may not have a concealed carry permit because you don't need one. Well, if you come from a constitutional carry state and you never bothered to get a permit because you don't need one in your home state, you're still covered by this federal law in, say, the state of New York. So that was a very important provision. Let's see, then the second one here. Paragraph 2, an individual not prohibited from federal law who's carrying a government-issued ID and is entitled and not prohibited from carrying a concealed firearm in the state in which they reside. This is the real constitutional carry provision. So you don't need a permit. You're carrying your driver's license, and you're not prohibited from carrying a concealed firearm in the state in which the individual resides, may possess or carry a concealed handgun other than a machine gun, in any state other than the state of residence. Again, this should read in addition to the state of residence. But if that state has a statute that allows residents of the state to obtain licenses and does not prohibit the carrying of concealed firearms by the residents of the state for lawful purposes. Now we get to conditions and limitations. Let's see. The possession or carrying of a concealed handgun in a state under this section shall be subject to the same conditions and limitations. Let's see. Imposed by or under federal or state law or the law of a political division of a state that applied to the possession or carrying of a concealed handgun by residents of the state. Oh, so this is saying that if you're from Wyoming and you travel to New York with your gun, you're allowed to carry your gun in New York, subject to the same rules as New York applies to its own concealed carry process. They're not explicit here, but I would imagine that means things like if New York has a 10-round magazine limit, you would be subject to the same 10-round magazine limit. You can still carry concealed, but otherwise, other than the conditions of eligibility to concealed carry, you're subject to the laws of the state you're visiting that has the more strict rules than your home state. Now, there are states that issue different levels of license. This was the case when I lived in Massachusetts. They had restricted concealed carry permits. Really, in Massachusetts, you needed a permit just to own a handgun, even just to keep it in your home. So they had basic permits for just having it in your home. They had restricted permits that allowed you to transport the gun between home and a range or between home and your place of business, but you couldn't concealed carry it between. And they had unrestricted licenses that essentially allowed you to carry everywhere that anybody would be allowed to carry a gun. That's what I always had when I lived in Massachusetts, was an unrestricted license. Here, they have this unrestricted license or permit provision. What that's saying is If you're from Wyoming and you go to Massachusetts, Massachusetts has to treat your Wyoming concealed carry permit as it would treat its own unrestricted concealed carry permits. So they can't, because they would, wouldn't they? They can't say, well, sure, we see you have a Wyoming concealed carry permit, but we're going to pretend that's one of our permits that only allows you to go to the range. This prohibits them from doing that. Let's see. And those are really all the substantive provisions of this statute. And it would take effect 90 days after enactment, 90 days after it was passed and then signed by the president, or passed over President Trump's veto, I guess, which I would not expect to happen. So that's the Senate version of the bill. The House version of the bill is essentially the same with some important differences. So the House bill does have a number. It's 38. HR 38 is this bill. It can be cited as the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know, so the House passes a version of a bill and the Senate passes a version of the bill. And if they both pass the House and the Senate, then they have to be reconciled. So the House and the Senate will set up a committee that will go through the two different versions of the bill and distill it down to one version. In that process, important provisions can be removed, including the teeth provision here in the House bill. So this reads, notwithstanding any provision of the law of any state or political subdivision, a person who's not prohibited by federal law from possessing a gun, who's carrying a valid identification document, a driver's license with a picture, and who's carrying a valid license or permit issued by their state that permits them to carry a concealed firearm, that person is entitled to carry a concealed firearm in the state in which the person resides. They can possess and carry a gun in any state that has a statute that allows its own residents to carry, which every state does, and does not prohibit the carrying of concealed firearms by residents of the state for lawful purposes, which no state anymore does. Let's see. This section shall not be construed to supersede or limit laws of any state that permits concealed carry, so it can't be used against your concealed carry provisions. Paragraph C, a person who carries or possesses a concealed handgun in accordance with the first two sections may not be arrested or otherwise detained for violation of any law or any rule or regulation of a state or political subdivision related to the possession, transportation, or carrying of firearms, unless there is probable cause to believe the person is doing so in a manner not provided by in this section. Presentation of facially valid documents, the driver's license, the concealed carry permit, is prima facie evidence that the individual has a license or permit as required by the section. So this was not in the Senate bill. This is saying they're trying to address the issue that I described with FOPA, right? Where they arrest you and charge you and say, that FOPA thing that lets you transport guns, you can raise that as an affirmative defense at trial at tremendous expense. They're trying to subvert that from being done here by saying, hey, if you're in accordance with the section, you can't be arrested or even detained for violation of a New Jersey gun control law, gun possession law. And merely having the driver's license and the concealed carry permit is prima facie evidence that you're in compliance. Next paragraph, when a person asserts this section as a defense in a criminal proceeding. So what happens if you hit the New Jersey issue with FOPA and they say, no, we don't care. We're gonna arrest you and charge you and prosecute you anyway in criminal court. Well, then you'd want to raise this federal law as a affirmative defense at trial against the unlawful gun possession charge. So the House bill and the Senate bill did not do this either. The House bill is taking this into consideration and addressing what could come up. And one of the things that could come up is, would this be an affirmative defense that you, the defendant, has the burden of proving to the court, to the jury? Or does the burden fall on the state prosecution to disprove this defense beyond any reasonable doubt? Well, they make it explicit here. When a person asserts this section as a defense in a criminal proceeding, the prosecution shall bear the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the conduct of the defendant did not satisfy the conditions of this section. You somehow didn't qualify. And when you successfully assert this section as a defense in a criminal proceeding, The trial court shall, not may, shall award the defendant reasonable attorney's fees. So this is saying if they decide to do the New Jersey FOPA thing, yeah, we know about FOPA. We don't care. We're going to arrest you, charge you, prosecute you, drag you into criminal trial, make you spend tens of thousands of dollars in a legal defense. And too bad. Even if your legal defense works and you get out of it, we use the process as the punishment. Here they're saying if they do that and you win, they have to pay your attorney's fees. Now, of course, that's money coming from the taxpayer. So maybe not much punishment for the cop who arrested you, the prosecutor who dragged you into trial. We'll get to that in a moment because there's teeth there too. But this is at least something, right? This is seeking to reward you the attorney's expenses, so they're not able to use that as a cudgel against you. By the way, often they'll just get people to take a plea. They'll say, listen, your lawyer will tell you it's going to cost you 40 grand to defend this at trial, or you go to prison. But if you don't want to spend the 40 grand, and there's no guarantee you'll win, there's always some risk of getting convicted. If you don't want to spend the 40 grand and have a risk of going to prison, take this plea deal. And now you're a convicted criminal. Nice. So continuing in paragraph D, a person who's deprived, this is the real teeth here. A person who is deprived of any right, privilege, or immunity secured by this section, in particular, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms on your person for lawful purposes, who's deprived of any right secured by this section under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or political subdivision. So somebody, let's use New Jersey again. New Jersey's claiming that you being in possession of that gun, concealed carry, violates their laws. If you're deprived of any right based on that argument by New Jersey, you can bring an action in any appropriate court against any other person, including a state or political subdivision, who caused the person, you, to be subject to the deprivation for damages and other appropriate relief. So what this is saying is you get to sue. This is your cause of action. It's making explicit that when New Jersey plays its games and tries to use the process as the punishment, you can sue them. You can sue them for damages. You can make it hurt them, cost them money. Now, it says you have a cause of action against any other person. This is important because the trial reimbursement of your legal expenses, that's nice, but that just comes out of the taxpayer's pocket, the general treasury fund. It's not hurting any of the individuals on a personal level who did this to you. But this does, because you can sue that cop as a person. You can sue that prosecutor as a person and recover from them personally damages. You think they might be less inclined to play these games on the side of the highway in New Jersey, I-95 southbound to Florida, if they know they're running the risk of getting sued for substantial sums of money every time they do this? I think it'll have a chilling effect, an appropriate chilling effect on their abuse of our constitutional rights under color of law. And immediately following that creation of the cause of action, by the way, in any appropriate court. Now, I'd like it if they were more explicit about this because it matters where you're allowed to sue. I expect you'd be able to be allowed to sue in a federal court in your home jurisdiction. So if you're traveling from Wyoming and New Jersey tries to jack you up on a gun possession case, I'm not sure the New Jersey courts would be that helpful, right? But I think a Wyoming court might be. So your ability to file this cause of action, file this suit in your home jurisdiction could make a huge difference here. But not only do you have this cause of action to sue them personally and as a governmental entity, so the police department, the town, the state, the second part of this paragraph also provides the court shall award, not may award, shall award the plaintiff prevailing in this action damages and other relief, including reasonable attorney's fees. Let's see. Then they have some definitions. What an identification document is. Anything like a passport with a photo. Sorry, driver's license with a photo would work. Presumably, a passport would work too. Maybe even just a concealed carry permit would work if you had one issued by your state with a photograph, which they all have now. My first concealed carry permit from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was basically a cardboard index card with no photograph. It's crazy. But now they all look like driver's licenses these days. They define handgun. That's fine. Oh, here's another important provision. Um, a person who possesses, and this was also not in the Senate bill. All the teeth and this provision were not in the Senate bill. So when these bills are passed, assuming they're passed in the House and the Senate, and they go to reconciliation, it's possible this good stuff in the House bill could be stripped out. We have to be careful about that in the interest of getting to a compromise that both the Senate and the House would pass to go for Trump's signature. This paragraph F, a person who possesses or carries a concealed handgun under this section shall not be subject to the prohibitions of section 922Q. What is 922Q? 922Q is the no carry in school zones, federal law. That is this. 18 USC 922 deals with a variety of unlawful acts you can commit with a gun. One of those is Q. Here's Q. Let's see. Here we go. It shall be unlawful for any individual knowingly to possess a firearm that has moved through interstate commerce. That's just to give them federal jurisdiction in a school zone. So you can't carry a gun in a school zone, according to federal law. What is a school zone? A school zone is 1,000 feet around a school. Now, of course, we don't know as we're going about our day if we're within 1,000 feet of a school. I wouldn't know if I was within 1,000 feet of the school here in my office. I don't think I am. But how would you know? Especially in any kind of community, there's houses and trees. You could easily be within 1,000 feet of a school. It's a ridiculous law. Ridiculous law. If you're carrying the gun for otherwise lawful purposes, right? Just a mode of statutory language here. And because it's so easy to get tripped up, there is a provision of this federal law that says, but we're going to carve out an exception. This prohibition does not apply to individuals possessing the firearm if they're licensed to do so by the state in which the school zone is located. So if you have a concealed carry license from your state, then this federal school zone law does not apply to you. But what if you travel to another state and you're in their school zone? Is that a violation of this federal statute? Because you don't have a concealed license from that other state, presumably, for purposes of discussion. Now, you may say, well, there's reciprocity with that other state. So they're recognizing my state's license. That has the same effect as if it was their state license. I think that's a compelling argument to make. But what about in a constitutional carry state? They don't require you to have a license. They're not recognizing your license. They're just simply saying you don't need it. So if you go to a constitutional carry state and you're within 1,000 feet of the school, are you violating this federal statute about no guns in a school zone? Maybe. I've just never seen a case brought to trial, so we don't know. We don't know how this will be applied until we actually see it applied. But in any case, this House bill says that if you qualify under this National Concealed Carry Reciprocity House bill, then the no guns in school zone law would not apply to you explicitly. Another nice thing in the House bill, they say there are provisions that say, if the state you're visiting would not allow you to carry, say, in a state park, you're still not allowed to carry in that state park. But they carve out the national parks, all the flavors of national parks. So a person here possessing or carrying a concealed handgun in a state you're visiting that normally would not recognize your permit has to recognize it in the following areas in the state that are open to the public, and that includes the National Park System, National Wildlife Refuge System, anything with the Bureau of Land Management or the Army Corps of Engineers or the Bureau of Reclamation or the Forest Service. That's a lot of stuff in some parts of the country. So that's good. They put that in explicitly. And this, again, would take effect 90 days after it was passed and signed by law. So that is the stuff I wanted to cover. The cause of action is really the teeth here. If you don't have that, states like New Jersey will just dick you around and use the process as the punishment. If you can make them be held financially, personally liable for their abuse of your rights under color of law, that's where you want to be, man. That is where you want to be. Now, again, I want to make clear, my solution, you put Andrew Branca in charge of this stuff. All these concealed carry permit requirements would be blanket violations of the Second Amendment, facially unconstitutional, cannot be required by law. Burn them all to the ground. Burn them all to the ground. All right, let me take a look here at the comments and questions. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to cover? First, I'll go to the members. By the way, Law Self-Defense members, I am planning to start up a regular series, maybe Friday afternoons, of live streams just for the members. Kind of more open-ended, less formal than the type of recorded content. More heavily produced content. We've hired, you probably noticed, our content's more polished these days, but more relaxed, hour-long live streams at least once a week for members only. Those would not be on YouTube. Let's see, go through the questions. Tony says, is it Vermont that has no license whatsoever? When I lived in Massachusetts, Vermont had almost no gun laws at all. They didn't even prohibit felons from possessing guns. I had a friend of mine who worked for the FBI at the time, one of the good FBI agents. And he would go on calls with local law enforcement, and they'd arrest a guy on felony charges, whatever, drug possession or something. And the guy had guns in his house. And he'd say, oh, we got to seize those guns. And the local cops would say, we can't seize them. There's no law against him having these guns, even though he's a known felon, because Vermont had no felon prohibition on possession of guns. Of course, the feds do. So a federal agent can seize the guns, but Vermont just wouldn't do that. So it wasn't that Vermont was constitutional carry, really. They just didn't have any law that said you had to have a permit to have or conceal the gun. I've heard that Vermont's, of course, become more liberal as people flee Massachusetts and New York and take their politics with them, unfortunately. And some of the now Vermont has effective gun laws. I don't know if that's true or not. Let's see. Yeah, it's great to see everybody. I'm sorry we haven't done more live stuff. We've been spending the last few months kind of revamping how we produce our content. We've hired some very expensive people who are doing great work for us. So I'm very pleased with what they're doing. And but it's a change, right? So now our shows are pre-recorded, they're produced. Graphic elements are added. They're 12 to 15 minutes long. And, but I do like to do the live stuff as well, like here. So let's see. Members only Fridays. Yep. That's the kind of thing I have in mind. All right. So that's all the Law Self-Defense member stuff. Let me take a look at YouTube. Let's see. Let's see. Territory asks, do you know of Copper Jacket channel? Copper Jacket, is that a YouTube channel? I do not know it. I do not know it. Let's see. But I might check it out if I remember. Let's see. Bump. Yeah, so a weird thing about New York is New York basically has New York City, the immediate suburbs of New York, like Suffolk County and Westchester County, and then the rest of the state. So it's like three coaxial circles. Um, Generally, in New York State, generally you can get a concealed carry permit, but that concealed carry permit would not be recognized in the areas immediately adjacent to New York and not be recognized in New York City, immediately adjacent to New York City and not recognized in New York City. If you had a Suffolk County permit, it would be recognized in Suffolk County and most of the rest of New York State, but not in New York City. Um, that's just what these fascist states do. They just make everything as inconvenient and problematic and ready to trap you in an honest error as possible. Um, yeah, so you might not believe this, but there was a time when I was a young man when New Jersey police would arrest New York police officers who carried their service pistols into New Jersey. Which, by the way, if you live like in New York City, you go to New Jersey with some frequency. But the cops were arresting the cops. Let's see. Jack says here in California, it depends on which county you reside in. Yes, that's for sure. So I have friends who live in Orange County who have concealed carry permits um, that I believe are valid through the whole state. But if you live in LA County, you can't get the permit, or it's a 3-year wait, or whatever nonsense they throw to block people. When I lived in Massachusetts, the permits were not issued by the state. The permits were issued by your local town police chief. Every little town in Massachusetts has its own police department. It could be a chief, a lieutenant, and two patrol cops, but it was their own police department, and your local chief issued your concealed carry permit, and it was valid in the whole state. So if you lived in a reasonable town in Massachusetts, you had no problem getting a concealed carry permit. I never did. But if you lived in Boston, they made it very difficult. So you had to be careful about where you lived. Let's see. Yeah, there's some of these gun control jurisdictions. They'll tell their cops, you carry your gun on duty, and then when you get off shift, you put it in your locker, you leave it here at the station. You're not allowed to bring your gun home. It's crazy. Let's see. Bruce says, I remember we still had to wait 3 days after having the pistol registered before we could go to the shop and pick it up. Colorado just last year passed a 3-day waiting period for the first time. I bought a couple guns since where I had to wait 3 days. It's crazy. Like I don't already have a bunch of guns. It's all nonsense. Of course, California's 10 days. That'll help you with looting right now, right? Go get a gun, come back in 10 days, and then you can defend your home. Yeah, another thing New York State used to do, I don't know if they still do it, but on the permit they issued, every gun you owned had to be listed by registration number, by serial number on that permit. So every time you bought and sold a gun, you had to get your permit modified. Crazy. They just hate you, and they hate the Second Amendment. Somebody asks, I can't pronounce the name, says, I live in New Hampshire. Thank God for constitutional carry. I recently saw your video by carrying with one in the chamber and was interested in your thoughts on accidental discharge from dropping your EDC. So the question would be, obviously, if you drop your gun unintentionally and it hits the ground and discharges, that was not an intentional firing of the shot. So for criminal charges, it would have to be recklessness, sometimes called criminal negligence, where you knew you were creating a risk of that happening and you ignored the risk and did it anyway. Can I imagine that being argued? Well, it depends on the circumstances. If you were goofing around with your gun, if you were spinning it on your finger through the trigger guard or juggling loaded guns and one of them hit the ground and went off, I might say that looks like recklessness to me. Of course, guns are not supposed to go off when they hit the ground, but we know that some do, right? We all know Modern guns are not supposed to go off just because they hit the ground, but Sig 320s appear to have had an issue going off. The company has voluntarily modified those guns, I guess. I own several 320s, and I had some of them modified for that purpose. Sent them back to Sig, had the modification done. It didn't help with the trigger press. Made the triggers a lot worse, which is the reason I liked the 320 in the first place. Was it had a decent trigger. And of course, older guns might go off, or guns that have had safeties disabled by previous owners, that they could potentially go off. If the dropping of the gun is legitimately accidental, you have a gun in your hand and somebody tackles you, or I don't know, you're hit by a car or something, a piece of the ceiling falls onto your head, something unforeseeable, then that would just be a legal accident, and I wouldn't see any liability for carrying with a loaded chamber. I don't know why you would carry without a loaded chamber. I have to be honest. I don't see it. Now, if you want to, that's fine. I don't tell people what to do. I guess it makes some people feel safer with the gun. So, you do you. It's certainly not a crime to carry with an empty chamber. I would just ask you to consider, if you're in a situation where you need that gun right now, which is why we carry the gun, for personal protection, how confident are that you're going to be able to chamber around to fire the gun before bad things have happened to you? You think about the George Zimmerman case. If he'd had to chamber around, he'd have been dead. So I carry with a round in the chamber. Every police officer on duty carries with a round in the chamber. The normal way to carry a gun for personal protection is with a round in the chamber. If you don't want to, that's fine. That's okay. But you'll never find me carrying a gun for serious purposes with an empty chamber. Let's see. Where was that? Okay, let's see. Miles says YouTube subs are crazy high. Yeah, we just broke 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. That was doesn't really change anything, but that was fun. We've been stuck about 60,000 subscribers for years. So the last 3 months have been a big change. Miles says YouTube subs are crazy high, but I prefer the possibly muted spontaneity of low production Branca. We'll bring it back, at least for members. That content won't be on YouTube. That'll be members only content. Fudmaster Flex says staccatos, for example, are not drop safe. Okay, so I've shot a few rounds through a staccato that was owned by other people. It's a 1911 type of pistol. I don't know them well. I don't know that they're not drop safe. I'll, for purposes of discussion, I'll have to take your word for it. I carried a 1911 for 25 years, and it was, supposed to be drop safe with the grip safety. I believe mine was like a pre-70 variation, so it didn't have a firing pin block, which most modern semi-automatic pistols today have a firing pin block that blocks the firing pin or the striker from hitting the primer unless the trigger is held to the rear. More, I don't know if I want to say modern, but the post, I believe that it's 1970, the post 1970 1911s, like from Colt, began to incorporate the same kind of firing pin block, but it complicates getting a good trigger out of the gun. So I was never a fan of those. Auto Doctor says Israeli police have to carry empty chamber, or they used to. Now I will say, so as all of you probably know, I never served in the military, but I have a lot of friends who have. And one of them explained to me a situation of empty chamber carry that I have to say made sense to me. And this was armed soldiers on a base. Like let's imagine not a base in a combat zone, but just in America, right? So they're basically pulling security on an American base. And the guy I was talking to had been a senior level officer. And he was like, yeah, we would tell those guys on security to not have a round in the chamber. Because they're 18 years old, and we don't want to trust our entire career on their judgment. We want them to have to take the extra step of cycling that bolt to get around in the chamber before they start firing the gun at something. an extra moment where they could, be evaluating the threat. And in that circumstance, we're not talking about a civilian defender who's on his own in a dark alley. We're talking about a soldier on a base. There's lots of other soldiers there, or Marines, or airmen, or whatever. And there's other people also pulling guard duty. So that person has backup. Should it turn out that he doesn't have time to cycle the bolt, that's a very different circumstance than a civilian defender. But in that circumstance, I mean, if I were that commanding officer, I might do the same thing. I mean, it made sense to me. You spend 20 years building a career. You don't want some 18-year-old kid screwing it up because he just heard a noise, a bear in the woods outside the gate, outside the fence. Let's see. Oh, I did want to mention something else. So these bills, as I said, I've been critical of these bills. I think the real solution is not to require permits. But I do think these bills serve a very important political function. And that is the shifting of the Overton window. The Overton window, of course, is it's a conceptual model for the notion that there are ideas and policies that the general public finds reasonable and acceptable, and then there are outlier ideas and policies the general public finds radical or unthinkable or horrible, and they're not willing to accept those. And the key of the Overton window is that it's not static. It can move. I talked earlier about how when I first started carrying concealed, very few states had concealed carry. Now all of them have some form of concealed carry. So the Overton window on concealed carry has moved. When I started carrying concealed, as other states began to adopt concealed carry, what was the argument against concealed carry? Blood will run in the streets. People will shoot each other over shopping cart arguments. Of course, none of that ever happened. But at the time, people took those arguments seriously. It was an argument against concealed carry. And the Second Amendment community has effectively moved the Overton window to the point where now the majority of states are constitutional carry. That's a very pro-2A movement of the Overton window. I think these statutes, even if they're not quite what I'd like them to be, represent another opportunity to shift the Overton window in a more pro-Second Amendment way. So certainly I'm not against these laws. I hope they pass. I hope they're signed into law by President Trump. I think they're a step in the right direction, and they change how the public understands what's reasonable about concealed carry. It becomes reasonable. It's the law that if you have a permit anywhere, it's good everywhere. That's a step in the right direction. I certainly support that. Let's see. Jack says, I live in California, have a CCW, surprised our corrupt governor hasn't tried to take it away from us. I lived in Massachusetts for 25 years with a concealed carry permit. And I was shocked that the Commonwealth allowed us to have concealed carry permits because they were issued in my little small town, Acton, Massachusetts, Metro West, Boston. But it was valid everywhere. I carried in Boston all the time, even though Boston would never have issued me a concealed carry permit if I lived in Boston. And I was always shocked. Those of us who had concealed carry permits in Massachusetts, we didn't talk about it very much. We kind of felt we were off the political radar, that if the legislature discovered that all these people had concealed carry permits, they would do something about it. But yeah, I was always surprised. Let's see. Let's see. I talked about, waiting periods, that some states have them, but they waive them for concealed carry holders. That's not what Colorado just did last year. It's a 3-day waiting period for everybody. And you have to do the background check, which of course is another fee. So in fact, you have to pay for the gun. They start the background check and it's 3 days after the background check finishes. So it could be longer than 3 days. It could be 4 days. Although in my experience, the background checks here, at least in my county, Douglas County, Colorado, are pretty quick. 15 minutes, half an hour is pretty typical. Grant says, don't fly into New York City with a CCW in the checked baggage. If you take possession of it, they will charge you. Avoid New York City flights. And by the way, that applies also if you end up in New York City because they diverted your aircraft. You hadn't planned to be in New York City. So you plan to fly from Maine to Florida. You're legal in both places. You get to the airport in Maine, you check your luggage, you declare a firearm in the checked luggage. They have you sign the orange card and put that in the bag. The fact that there's a gun on the plane goes into the manifest for the aircraft. So, like, the pilot knows there's bags with a gun in it. The authorities in New York would know. So, if that flight going from Maine to Florida has a problem and ends up getting diverted and lands at Kennedy Airport in New York City in Queens, uh, the authorities can look at the manifest and see that there's a checked bag with a gun in it on the aircraft. And if it's a sufficiently long diversion and layover, unintended layover, that they offer you your checked bags so you can stay overnight in a hotel and have your stuff. If that bag is on the carousel and you touch it, you're now in possession, unlawful possession of that gun in New York State, and they will prosecute you. The only safe harbor you have is to leave the checked bag in the possession of the airline. The airline is what's called a common carrier of goods. So these gun possession laws don't apply to common carriers. So they don't have to worry about getting in trouble. But the instant you touch that bag, you are now in possession of that bag and the gun. So you have to tell the airline, I'm not taking my bag. You have to keep my bag and then put it on my flight tomorrow. Yacht Captain Lance says, hey, I live in Acton now. Still great on concealed carry permits. Yeah, some of the guys I kind of grew up with isn't the right word. We were all adults, but I spent time with when I lived in Acton are now Acton police officers, and they're good guys. Yeah, they're good guys. Acton is, I mean, of course, it's Massachusetts, right? So politically, it leans liberal. But the police there, all those communities around Acton never gave me a hard time. I lived in Acton, Maynard, Littleton, a bunch of little towns around there, and all those police chiefs were fine. I asked them about it one time, and they said because I was like, listen, I don't want to get a restricted permit. I want the unrestricted license. And the licensing officer just said, listen, we're either going to give you one or not, and if we give it to you, it's unrestricted. If we don't trust you with an unrestricted license, we're not giving you a license. But again, it was never an issue for me. Yeah, Colorado just added a tax, like California. Colorado just added a tax to ammo, an ammo-specific tax now. I can't wait. I can't wait to get out of here. We are moving. We are moving out of Colorado, almost certainly to Tennessee. Although we're planning to move. We were planning to move this summer, but I think we may have to delay another 9 months or so to the following summer. For various reasons. So I could be here another year. Let's see. Yeah, we were looking at Nashville, like the Franklin, Brentwood area. But my wife, our key constraint is schools. So I still have 2 school-age kids, and the quality of their education is of the utmost importance to us. So we start this process by finding a top quality school first, and that's the community we'll start looking at houses in. Nashville, the Brentwood, Franklin area has a couple of really good schools, so we were looking there. But I don't need to live in the Nashville area. And my wife found a couple of excellent schools in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. So now we're looking there as well. And Knoxville, of course, is closer to the mountains. So I would prefer to move there. So now we're looking more closely at Knoxville. But it's if it's not Tennessee, I would be surprised if we didn't end up in Tennessee, somewhere in the eastern half of the state. Someone says, don't do Brentwood, go more south. Yeah, Brentwood is a little further, is a little closer to Nashville proper than I would like. We are looking south. The trouble is, again, you get away from the schools. So we got to be within 20 or 30 minutes of a good school. Keep moving and moving and moving. How American is that? Yeah, well, that's the blessing of America. We have 50 states. If you don't like it where you are, you can move to another one. Every state can be its own social experiment. I'm a single individual. I don't have the power to make Colorado not suck. Yeah, Oak Ridge has some great schools. Yep. And also kind of south of Oakland. That's a general area we're looking at. Let's see. Michael says, I was considering moving to Colorado in a year, but I see it's becoming less gun friendly. Why? Well, because we have in the 8 years I've lived here, we went from a purple state with a split legislature to a supermajority Democrat state with a Democrat governorship and a Democrat state Supreme Court. All the Californians coming in. We're literally awash in cars with California license plates. So we just became, California, basically. And we're adopting all the California things. Like you can't get plastic shopping bags in the grocery store anymore. Only paper bags that may as well be made out of tissue paper, and they charge you 10 cents a bag for them. So it's all that nonsense that's driving me. You can't buy a gas-powered lawnmower in Colorado anymore. You can only buy the battery-powered ones. So it's all that Californication stuff that is driving me out. Grant says Tennessee has too many floods. Well, they have some floods. I don't know what too many is. There's places you can live with a low flood risk. No, the laws I just mentioned in Colorado are statewide. Let's see. The one thing I will miss about Colorado, of course, is the geography. Like California, Colorado has great geography. The mountains, especially if you're a motorcycle rider like me, I've ridden all over Europe, all over North America, and the riding here in the Rocky Mountains is by far the best in the world. It's not even close. I think it's better than the Alps. The riding, strictly the riding. The Alps has a better kind of culture stuff and lots of little towns and very cute and all that. There's not much up in the mountains of Colorado, except great roads that are remarkably well kept, lots of curves, and very little traffic enforcement, which I'm told can be important to some motorcyclists. But of course, when mountains come winter, with winter comes snow, so it's a relatively short riding season here. But that's the only thing about the state I'll miss. But I've been riding these roads now for 8 years. It's fine. Appalachia has some nice roads too. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, someone says New Jersey got rid of even paper shopping bags. Yeah, Colorado. Once you're up in the mountains, it's the eastern half of the state is just a flat desert. It's basically Kansas, so it's nothing to write home about. But once you're west of the Front Range, once you're in the mountains, it's like every turn is a watercolor painting. It's amazing. It's amazing. All right, I think I'll take one last look at the members. Marnock Pass. So just to give an example, I've got a poster I made up with a ride that a buddy of mine took in the mountains here. A buddy of mine who lives here in the Denver area. He's a rider too, and we took our motorcycles into the mountains, and in one day, in a single day, we rode about 110,000 feet of mountain passes, meaning we went over 10,000 foot or higher mountain passes on our motorcycles, enough of them in a single day to add up to about 110,000 feet of elevation. I don't know any place else in the world you can do that. It's incredible. And a lot of nice places to ride, like the Black Hills of South Dakota, for example. Listen, I love it. It's beautiful up there. I love riding up there, but there's a couple days worth of good riding up there. And then you've ridden everything. I'm talking just roads here, paved surfaces. You can spend 3 weeks in Colorado riding fantastic paved roads and never cover the same ones twice. Let's see. Oh, there are some more comments from the members, so let me speak to them. Let's see. Yeah, don't ever voluntarily connect on a flight in New York with a gun. That's just looking to get convicted. John says, law self-defense member John says, they still list serial numbers of your guns on your permit in New York. My permit is 3 cards long. Yeah. Like, why? Why? They're just crazy. These anti-Second Amendment cultures, they see a gun on a table, it may as well be a live rattlesnake. They have a very visceral, histrionic, emotional reaction to it. Of course, guns need to be handled safely. They are dangerous. But no gun has ever self-animated and hurt anybody. Yeah, New Jersey is the same. Yeah, I mean, I have family in New York and New Jersey. I'm there every year, at least once a year to visit my family. I don't bring a gun there. It's because I don't want to go to jail. Let's see. Paul says, when I first started carrying, I was scared to have around in the chamber. Yeah, I get it. You should do whatever you think is safest for you. Safest for you. If that means carrying with an empty chamber, that's what you should do. We all have different kind of risk profiles that we're comfortable with. Just keep in mind, right? If some guy's attacking you and you're using your one arm to hold them off, how are you going to cycle that slide? I mean, I know technically there's ways to do it. You can drag the rear sight on your belt and all that. I've done that stuff in training. Drag the slide on the kneel and drag the rear sight on the heel of your shoe. I've done that stuff in training. I don't know how you do that when you're getting punched in the face. But whatever, people should do what they're most safe with. Let me see if I have any comments on the Twitter stream. I never do. I don't know why. 1,000 views on Twitter, but no questions or comments. All right, fair enough. All right, guys, I think with that, I am going to go ahead and wrap up the show. We've been on a little longer than an hour. Again, for you law self-defense members, this show was live streamed everywhere, but for you law self-defense members, it is my intention to start doing a weekly live show just for members, like this kind of format. Maybe cover stories that I can't cover. There's lots of stuff I can't cover on YouTube. Lots of shooting videos I can't cover on YouTube because we get strikes. And there's lots of stories that are really, they're too short for like a full, quote, 15-minute YouTube show, produced YouTube show. But they are things worth commenting on. So I might string a whole bunch of those together, make that part of a show. But again, that'll just be for law self-defense member. If you're not a law self-defense member, I have to ask you why, because it's only 99 cents to try it out. Lots of benefits. Try it out for 2 weeks for 99 cents. And even after the 2-week trial, it's only about 25, 30 cents a day, less than $10 a month to be a law self-defense member. You can try it out at lawofselfdefense.com/trial for the trial membership. I used to have a banner for that. I don't know if there we go. Lawofselfdefense.com/trial for the trial membership, just 99 cents. 99 cents, folks. All right, so I'll wrap up by reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.